So we'll start seeing all the participants. Hopefully they didn't leave me. Yep, welcome everybody. I know that you're going to slowly be coming in today, so we'll just wait for him to be. Hopefully we didn't lose a whole bunch of people because we had some technical difficulties on our end. We have a great presentation today. And Dave, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that some people may jump in, and like I said before, you know, it's a quiet group, but we do have a lot of people that come back and watch the recordings at a later time as well. So thank you, Dave Reese, for being here today. Dave is an IT specialist with Perry ProTech. And Dave, if you want to go ahead and pull your slides up, we could go ahead and get started there. But not only is Perry ProTech the keynote speaker today, but they are also a sponsor of our Chamber University online training program. And today we're going to be talking about cyber attacks and cybersecurity, because it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And with that being said, I would like to thank Dave for being here today. I know that this is a very real subject, and you'd be surprised as small businesses how much this pertains to you versus larger companies. So thank you, Dave. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera. If you have questions, please go ahead and leave them in the chat box, and I will help facilitate that, and then we'll do some Q&A afterwards. Thank you, Dave. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. As Nicole stated, my name is Dave Reese. I'm the Chief Security and Technology Officer for Perry ProTech. And today, going over a topic on how you protect yourself in today's world of cyber attacks. So as she mentioned, it is October's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. You can go out and Google that if you want and get more information. But the tag for this month is Do Your Part, Be Cyber Smart. So let's get started. So in today's world, you may have asked yourself some of these questions, such as, you know, am I a target? What can they get from me if they do hack me? And then, well, how would they hack me in the first place? You know, you see things in the movies and on TV about cell phones getting hacked and all this other stuff, but you know, how do they get into your company? How do they get on your computer? And then if and when they do, would you know what to do? Are you prepared to respond to do something when you are compromised? And then finally, we'll go over some things like, what can I do to protect my organization? We'll give you some takeaways at the end of this. So let's get started. We're just going to jump right into, am I a target? Well, that's an emphatic yes. Everyone is a target. And I'll talk about ransomware more specifically than just cyber attacks in general, because ransomware is so prevalent right now. But everyone is a target for the basic reason that the threat actors want money. So they're going to go after people, organizations that have money. It's not just large corporations. You know, if we're going after US Bank or going after a bank, you know, Nationwide or Carlisle Pipeline, big targets are just what they are. They're big targets. In most cases, they have people dedicated to respond to security incidents. They usually have the budgets and the people to put up different security layers to better protect their organization. Not that much is true when you get into the SMB and small mid-enterprise space. It's not uncommon to see successful companies have their heads down doing what they do, right? So they're not looking at it as, what would happen if someone hacked me? You know, what interruption would I have? So smaller organizations without these dedicated resources typically are not aware that they have been attacked until it's too late. And again, ransomware as an example, threat actors usually can take anywhere from just a few days to perhaps weeks to plan out and facilitate the launch of ransomware in an environment. And that can be dependent on how much data they exfiltrate, et cetera. So they can be in your network for a long time. I mean, the average amount of time that a threat actor is in your network before you realize it is around 7 months. That's the average. And experts estimate that a ransomware attack will occur every 11 seconds in 2021. I can tell you from personal experience in the last 12 to 15 months in our patch of the woods, we've seen an escalation in ransomware attacks in our neck of the woods. And back in first part of the year, we were working on a ransomware incident, and the client got in touch with, through law enforcement to the FBI. The Secret Service actually responded. They worked together. The Secret Service responded and said that at that point in time, and this was early in 2021, that the demographic regions of the United States that were hardest hit by ransomware, number one was Miami, Florida. Number two was the I-75 corridor between Cincinnati and North Dayton, which is our neck of the woods. So we're thinking, what's up with that? Why this corridor? And then they said, with the escalation in the number of incidents that were occurring at the beginning of this year, we would quickly and most likely take over that number one spot from Miami, Florida. So, you wonder why us? Well, there's a couple things that I've born raised in this area of the country. So one of the things I feel is that we're very trusting people. And the other one is that we're usually a little hesitant to adopt technology. In my career in technology goes back into the 80s. So I've seen a lot of technology life cycles, and it's not uncommon to see us lag behind the coasts of our country by a year or two of technology adoption. So that kind of puts us in the sweet spot of being a target. So let's talk about the next question. What can they get from me? Well, again, from a ransomware perspective, we're talking money. They want to encrypt all of your data. They want to encrypt your backups. They want to hold you hostage, much in the same way as they would kidnap a family member. They want to hold that hostage for money. These hackers feel that this is their business. It's their job. They have departments like tech support departments. If people are having a hard time processing payments or decrypting their software after they've paid the ransom, it's crazy. They're criminals, but right now we're getting a lot of activity. You've probably seen it on the news from Russia, and in that country, they don't go by our laws, so they can do whatever they want. And as long as these hackers stay out of Russia as far as hacking targets, then they're pretty much able to do whatever they want to do. And that's what we're seeing. They actually have, I've seen some data that say that the ransomware programs will look, and if they have like a Russian keyboard attached to the computer, it just says, okay, pass, and just stays away from them. But they're coming to get money, and they can get that in different forms. One, you pay the ransom if you have no recourse. Two is they can exfiltrate or take data, they steal data. And unless you have the proper logging systems set up or do forensic analysis after the incident, you may not know what they've taken. So they're going to look for valuable data that they can sell on the internet if you don't pay the ransom. A story on this, the Apple just had an announcement, I think it was Monday of this week, and they released some new MacBooks and some other gear. There's a company called Quanta down in Taiwan that is a contract manufacturer and makes the MacBook Pros for Apple. They had a ransomware incident several months ago. And I believe what I heard was the ransom was about $5 or $10 million. The threat actors got in there, they took the data, not necessarily knowing what they were getting, but as they started going through the data, they found out that they had the prints and the manufacturing data for the Apple MacBook Pro that was going to be released this month. So they went to Apple and asked for $50 million in ransom, or they were going to release all of this data, knowing that Apple felt like, hey, this is our design and our patents, that's going to be valuable. So they're looking for other types of data that they can pivot on to exploit other organizations. So you have to take a couple of steps back and look at your organization and say, what's the important parts? What are the crown jewels of my organization that if we were to lose it or not have access to it for an extended period of time, what's that risk? And you do that as part of your risk assessment in the organization. So you kind of have to ask yourself, what's the most important thing, and then kind of come down the priority list. And that will help dictate the budgets that you would put towards protecting that data. And then we come down to, how do they hack me? Well, it's not like a James Bond type thing where they can walk up and access everything that you have, but it's pretty simple when you look at the methods. They typically are not going to necessarily go after the technology first. They'll go after the human first, because face it, there have been con men around forever, and people have been getting conned for a long time. So they're playing on the gullibility of the human factor. So phishing emails is one of the top methods they use. Now, if you haven't heard of phishing, most people have, you're going to get an email coming in that is going to try to stimulate an emotional response. Like it could be, you keep sending me these bills and I'm not going to pay the invoices, and here's the spreadsheet with all my payment information. Stop bothering me. And if it hits the right person in your organization, they might just open up that spreadsheet, which, by the way, has a little extra present of some malware that's going to infect your computer, and then most likely give that threat actor remote access to your machine without you knowing it. They're going to stimulate the emotional side of your brain, because the emotional side of your brain reacts faster than the logical side of your brain does. So we talk about think before you click when we talk about phishing and security awareness training, because you really have to take pause and double check. So phishing emails are a very, very high use tool for hackers. They're going to send links, they're going to send files, they're going to possibly even start conversations with someone as they're going to impersonate someone else maybe in the organization. It could be like the CEO wanting to get gift cards for, in a CEO fraud incident type, they would try to get someone to go buy gift cards on a company credit card and then send them the gift cards, right? That's been around for a few years. And unfortunately, some people still fall for it. But the phishing email concept is they're trying to dupe the human. And then we move to weak credentials. Now, weak credentials are just what they mean. Usually people have a password requirement, uppercase, lowercase, letters, numbers, maybe some punctuation. So I'm thinking, gosh darn it, they make me change my password all the time. I just had this one. It was a really good one. It was summer 2021 with an exclamation point at the end and a capital S, because that way I satisfied all my requirements there. So weak credentials on that one, by the way, is actually in a ransomware playbook, because season, year, and for whatever reason, exclamation point and question mark are usually put at the ends. Those are like on the most common password list for the hackers. They don't even have to run a dictionary attack. They just usually put those in because they work, because so many people use those. Again, weak credentials or single factor authentication with the username and password. That's a very common one. Now, the problem with a weak password, I mean, obviously it's weak, but if it's a problem with single factor credential, because when you take a silly, simple password like summer 2021 exclamation point, and you add the over 500 million leaked credentials that are out on the dark web, they have a lot of information to use to get in as your password. So if you think you have a really unique way of creating passwords, like your pet names, your kid names, that type of thing, you're not unique. These hackers understand how people think and their behavioral traits, and in general, what most people do when they try to choose a password. So those are common passwords that they're going to use to come after your credentials. When you have single factor credential, that hacker can log into the network. They can log in, like a work from home person, or they can log in to get your web email. They can log into your Microsoft 365 or your Google as you. And if they have your credential, they become you. So you have to make sure that you add another component. How do they hack me? No two-factor authentication. I mentioned the credential is single factor. Multi-factor is another form of information. It's something that you have. So the credential, your username and password, is something you know. When you go to a two-factor, it then adds something you have. Something you have is typically a 30-second PIN code. It can either be sent to you via text message. You might have a little hardware like key fob token that you use that generates a number, or you may have an app that you can put on your mobile phone, on your smartphone, and it will sync up and generate that PIN code for you. So unless you have this extra thing, the have part, something you know can be out there on the dark net, but something you have, even though it's not 100% impenetrable, because those can be circumvented as well, it's very, very high-end credential hack to get the multi-factor authentication. So having that two-factor authentication really helps to reduce your exposure. Another one is unpatched software. You may have heard of Hafnium. Hafnium was the Microsoft Exchange hack that occurred, again, started leaking out around a year ago, and then it started hitting people in early March. That was a common one because there was no fix for it at the time. If you had an on-premise Exchange server, you had the Hafnium exploit. That vulnerability existed. And then if the threat actors, which it was suspected coming out of China, were scanning the internet looking for Exchange servers that had this vulnerability. And once they had the vulnerability, they just connected, dropped down their malware, which was called a web shell or a proxy shell. It gave the threat actors remote access to your Exchange server. Now, what do they want to get? They can pull out email. They can pull out account information. They could steal all kinds of data. Again, looking for valuable data they can turn around and sell on the dark web. And then there were other threat actor groups that were coming in trying to exploit that to launch ransomware, again, to make money. So the point here is they get through unpatched software. They're first going after the human, which is kind of the softest part, and then they're going after unpatched software, and then they'll move into like weaker, antiquated endpoint protection software. So if you've got like the antivirus or endpoint protection that's 2, 3, 5 years old, that style of antivirus or endpoint protection software was not designed to deal with the type of attacks that the hackers are using today. It's a cat and mouse game. So you really have to be cognizant of if you have the right protection in place. And then finally, poor network design, poor security design. This is something that really popped to the surface rather than bubbled. It popped to the surface when COVID-19, the pandemic started, a year and a half ago. When we had the push to work from home, you have to social distance, work from home if you can. And all of a sudden, IT departments were tasked with, how do I get all these people that are now working remote into the network? Well, remote desktop protocol, or like a virtual desktop where you can just session in over the internet, became a very common method. Unfortunately, open remote desktop protocol and those remote desktop services is what was typically deployed because it was quick and easy. Unfortunately, you've got threat actors that are scanning the network all day long, and when they see that protocol open, now all they have to do is go back to that single factor credential. And once they get in as, Bob, they're in as Bob. And you wouldn't know that it wasn't Bob because you don't see him, and Bob is trusted. So Bob is in your network when it's not really Bob. So then you ask yourself, am I prepared if I'm compromised? Well, it's a great question. You need to ask that amongst your organizational management team, but you have to have things like an incident response plan. Do you have an incident response plan? This is like the exit plan that they post at a hotel or in a large public building. How do you get out in case of an emergency? Well, an incident response plan is like a recipe on what do you do when you have a cyber attack. When you go through a cyber attack, and you have to address this as if you will go through it versus if. When you go through it, trust me, the stress and anxiety will be a little abnormally high. And that's kind of an understatement. It just depends on how well people handle stress. But at that point, you don't want to have a Chinese fire drill. You don't want people running all over, wondering what's going to happen. You need to be able to take a deep breath and follow that plan. Along with that, you don't want everybody going back to the people that are knee deep in the muck and say, well, when's it going to be back up? What are you doing now? You have a dedicated role for a communication manager. Have that person find out the information, and then they can disseminate to both the internal and the external stakeholders of what's happening, what the expectations are going to be, and just keep everyone off the back of those people that are doing the actual response. Make sure you understand who's involved, so you've got all this together when the time comes. And then the backup and recovery systems, you need to make sure that those are functioning. You want to make sure you test your plans and test your backups. Having a backup is great, but if you can't restore, it's zero. You have to be able to restore. So it takes me to kind of the end where I said I was going to provide some takeaways. So what can I do to protect my organization? The first thing is you have to have a plan. Failure to plan is a plan to fail. So you've got to have a plan with how you will respond. But some of the things that you can implement, we look at network security or cybersecurity as using a layered approach. There's not one silver bullet box, a blinky light box or whatever that you can just buy and set it on the shelf and plug it in and it's just going to fix everything. Doesn't work that way. We have a multitude of threat components like ingress methods, ways to access our networks. We have data in the cloud, right? You might be at Microsoft or Google or some other hosted service. You've got all of these different things that you need to protect. The hacker only needs to get in one of them. So the scales are tipped already. So things that you want to do, a great ROI is security awareness training. Security awareness training, you can't expect people to know what to do unless you give them proper instruction, right? It kind of goes with anything. You put somebody out on a machine on the shop floor, you train them before they go to operate the machine so they don't hurt themselves or hurt someone else. Same kind of thing goes with using a computer. Sometimes we just take things for granted or people kind of learn through the grapevine. But security awareness training can provide the education on how to spot red flags in an email, kind of that think before they click mentality. They also typically include phishing test emails that give the users practice so they can practice spotting those red flags when they come in. Great ROI there. Implementing email security. This is another component. It's typically up in the cloud, but it's, again, a layered approach that when email comes into your organization, it goes to this email security service provider first, and they run it through, if you can kind of envision like filters. You're kind of putting it through a sieve, and it's going through anti-malware, antivirus checks. It's looking at the validity of senders. It's looking at links to make sure that it's not going to a malicious site. And it tries to sanitize that email before it actually hits your inbox. Because again, the weakest part is it's you and I, it's the user. And then another thing to think about is the whole password thing. We talked about weak credentials and this single factor authentication. Just like the English language, you have passwords. Now, I don't know that anyone could say that they love trying to remember this random mixture of letters, upper and lowercase letters, punctuation, symbols, and numbers. And you can remember that, and they really enjoy having all these passwords that they have to remember, right? Nobody does that. That's why we come up with stuff like summer 2020, we want an exclamation point. So like the English language, you've got words and you've got sentences or phrases. We can do the exact same thing. And the National Institute of Science and Technology, who we pattern a lot of our mindset behind NIST and the cybersecurity framework, we pattern a lot of our beliefs behind that. So they have recently come out and said, what used to be like change your password every 60 to 90 days, they're now coming out and saying, don't do that, but don't use passwords. And we're evolving. Someday we'll have like zero trust networking. We won't use necessarily passwords, but there'll be other types of credentials we'll use. But if you've got like one of the new iPhones, and I think Samsung does this with the Androids, is that face recognition stuff where you don't even have a password anymore, it's your face. Biometrics can exist in computer environments as well, but we're looking at passphrases, right? So think of something in your life, not something you post in your social media that you let other people know, but something that's close to you that you have distinct clarity of. It could be your favorite song or your favorite class your freshman year. It could be favorite song you had when you got married. Might be the favorite song when you got divorced. I mean, whatever. But something that's in your head that you're not going to forget. But not anyone outside your brain is going to just guess it, right? So now you have a passphrase. It could be something like, I enjoyed Chem 101 on Tuesdays. Now, that might stick in your head, but you can type that because we're used to typing sentences. And you can usually remember that much easier than you can remember 12 or 15 random characters that don't make any sense. Now, you can shorten that down and you can use different letters. You can uppercase, lowercase, that type of thing to get the complexity requirements for your organization, whatever they require. But my point here is that if you have a passphrase that is in the 24 characters or longer, now again, you're typing a sentence, so it's not that difficult if you can type. For me, it's a lot easier than Shift 4 and 66X capital V and all this other stuff, because I got to sit there and hunt and peck for those. But typing in a passphrase that's easy to remember but almost impossible to guess is really the recommendation today. And then you take that along with implementing a second factor of authentication. And if there's only one thing you take away from today, take away this. Implement multi-factor authentication on every remote access method to your network. I don't care if it's TeamViewer, Outlook Web Access, remote desktop, VPN, whatever it is, implement multi-factor authentication on it. And then when that's done, turn to the cloud and look at all of your hosted services, Microsoft 365, Salesforce.com, QuickBooks in the cloud, whatever it is. All of those logins, you go to your banking sites, anything where you're putting in, again, the crown jewel type data, and then you can back off from there to the next tier, enable two-factor authentication. It might be as simple as them sending you a text message to your phone. That's probably the least secure, but do it. It will tremendously reduce your exposure to having a single factor authentication breach. Patch your systems. Patching your systems, I know it takes time, but I don't know how else to say this. You have to do it, period. I mean, I told Nicole this, I'm in the middle of working an incident right now, a ransomware incident that fired off Monday morning. And, you know, they came in through a server that was not patched. And so it's like you're inviting them in the door, because that Exchange server with Outlook Web Access has to have access ports open on your firewall. It's not a firewall thing. This isn't a user thing. It's the fact that the server wasn't patched. That organization was not following a good patch methodology. They didn't have a patch policy where they were scheduling patches. And then implement offsite backup and verify. Now, what I mean by that is you're looking at 3 copies of your data in 2 locations, distinct, different geographic locations. So you're going to have the actual data, and this is where you want to look amongst yourselves and say, do I have data stored on my local computer that's valuable? And am I backing it up? Because you can't just assume your organization is going to back it up if they don't know you're storing it local. They typically will provide a place for you to store it. And if you go outside of that norm, you might be on your own. So you have to take that into account. Make sure that you have it on, you have a copy of the data on a backup appliance. So that's your second copy somewhere on your network you can easily restore from. And then what we recommend with our systems is then we then ship that data. It's encrypted at rest on that appliance. And then we ship it over an encrypted tunnel to a secure data center. And even the data center, they can't get to your data because it's encrypted. So they don't know what it is either. So, and you want to verify that. Verify that that's working and verify you can restore. Because the worst thing that can happen is when you get ransomware and you think you're okay because you got your backups, and then you go to get your backups and it's like, oh, well, they're encrypted too. And then you don't have anything to restore from. So you need to make sure that you have that disconnect there. And then upgrade to extended detection and response software. Now this is essentially the next version or next generation of endpoint protection or antivirus software. Again, I mentioned before, if you've got older style antivirus software that's 2, 3, 5, 10 years old, and you've been using the same one because it's been there and it's been working, you really do need to investigate extended detection and response software. You may see it as XDR. Early detection and response software is typically EDR. But what we're trying to do is that the hackers have grown in their skill sets and they've changed their methodology. This is that proverbial cat and mouse game. So they've seen what the older methodology is of these antivirus programs, and they circumvented those. And then we come up with next generation AV or endpoint protection software. So they change their methods again, and their tactics and their techniques then have evolved to now some of the current attacks use Windows, like Microsoft Windows attacks for ransomware, for instance. They actually use Microsoft tools that are installed with the operating system. They're not like bringing down this big dark sparkly thing that draws attention. They're using tools like PowerShell that an IT admin in your organization may use. So they're kind of flying under the radar here. So this next generation, this extended detection and response software, will look for the type of actions that all these processes are performing. So when a threat actor tries to launch ransomware to do something bad, then the bells will go off and it'll stop that because it knows it's kind of outside the line. And then finally, you need to have a place to start. So if you're not sure what the security posture is of your organization, or you just want to check it, a good point in time process is to perform a security audit, security network audit, and understand where your weaknesses are. Talk about that, figure out, okay, going back to that crown jewels and your risk assessment, what's the most important things that I need to protect, and are they protected adequately with where we're at right now? So it's not uncommon to find things like user accounts that are still active for people that are no longer in your organization. So in summary, yes, you are a target. Compromise can be very expensive. It's not uncommon to be in the 5-figure and in some cases 6-figure to get through like a ransomware incident, depending on the extent of the incident and whether or not you have to pay ransom, so on and so forth. If you've got cybersecurity insurance, that's great, but the insurance companies that I've worked with, more and more requirements are being put on the organization to prove that they're doing some of these things that the carrier wants you to be doing. Two-factor authentication is going to be one of these things that probably by the end of the year is going to be a requirement in some cases. I've got some software that I use that they just said, I've been using two-factor for a year and a half, 2 years, but they said by the end of this year, two-factor is not an option. You'll have to do it. But a compromise can be very, very expensive. And we're just talking about the recovery, have not even taken into account, because this is something you have to do, is what's your cost of downtime? When you're paying everybody and they're sitting around looking at each other because they can't use their computers and that's what they do all day long, and then it puts you behind. Can you pay your people? Can you pay your vendors? Can you complete your client demands? But the good news is you can protect yourself. Again, act, do something. Again, it's not a silver bullet. Think of this as like an onion. It's a layered approach. And the more layers that hacker has to come through, the more effort they have to expel. And they're thinking, I just want some slam dunks to make a little cash. And if it's difficult for them, they might just pull up anchor and sail. It's kind of like being chased by a bear. You don't have to be a fast runner. You just have to be faster than the slowest person. The hackers kind of use that mentality there. They're going after the easy drive-bys. If they can scan and see you've got OpenRDP or a VPN with no two-factor authentication, all they have to do is sit there and just spray passwords until they get in. They're getting your usernames off of places like LinkedIn. They can, and they can find that. I mean, people are publishing that. Business intelligence sites, they can find out, what your revenues are, and that's how they're going to figure out just how much they want to charge you for ransom. So again, I'm bringing it around Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Do your part, be cyber smart. So at this point, do we have any questions?
Yeah, actually we do, Dave. So thank you first and foremost for being here. This is a lot of really great information. One of the questions that came through was when you were talking about the incident response plan. Is that something that can be created? Like, do they contact someone similar to Perry or Perry Protect Services to create this incident response plan? Where would they start when it comes to the process of making sure that they're protected?
That's a great question. It's actually a common question that we get from these. There are a multitude of places that you can get incident response plans, and it needs to be tailored to your company. So think of it as you're going to look for a template. So you can go out to a search engine on the internet and just search for cybersecurity incident response plan template or incident response plan template. You can also look for their increased in popularity ransomware incident response plan templates. And you can find a multitude of sources. You can get public organizations have those available. Our government makes them available. There's some good ideas you can get from NIST, NIST.gov, NIST.gov. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, they provide a tremendous amount of useful cybersecurity and technology documents. They have everything from securing Windows documents to things like these templates and incident response plans. So that's a great question.
Well, thank you. That's great information because, with a lot of small businesses, I have learned, and we hear as Chamber of Commerce, that a lot of our businesses aren't protected. They don't feel as if they need to be protected because they don't feel that this is something that's going to happen to them because they're not a big business. So thank you for addressing that. And, a lot of people also don't think about their phones, which is something that I'd like to talk to you about for something in the future as well. But how often should we test these plans then?
So another great question. So we do have a service that we call Compliance Manager, and it's a hosted platform that uses the framework, the security framework that your organization wants to follow. For instance, if you're healthcare, you're going to follow HIPAA. If you're a Department of Defense subcontractor, you have to follow the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Plan, which is a NIST. It's kind of a superset of a special publication 800-171 from NIST, and it provides an entire framework, like a checklist of all the things you should be doing to reach an acceptable level of security. So what we do with our compliance management platform is you determine what you want to do. If you have a requirement like a DoD or healthcare, payment card industry, if you process credit cards, payment card industry has their own. And then we have the general one, which is what I typically talk about, is the cybersecurity framework. There's no badge or certification or audit that you have to go through, but it's a general purpose framework that we follow, and it scans the network, tries to automate the collection of the data that's in your servers, on your users and in your computers and your policies and such. And then I believe we have some templates there for completing the policies, things like password policies and the incident response plan, and putting all these things in to like a to-do list to help facilitate the delivery of that. And then we offer consultation with that like every 2 weeks, where we sit down and have a meeting just to make sure that we do the things that we can do from a technology perspective, and then you would do the things you do from the business knowledge perspective. And then, like I said, for those things like an incident response plan, as an example, if you don't have one of those templates, I think there's templates that you can use. We find one that matches your organization. Then you just go ahead and have your meetings internally and do your due diligence and complete that. Because
that's wonderful information. It's very important that they need to start somewhere, and that's a great place that they can start.
Yeah, and knowing what to do when it happens is key. I had just my own personal experience. I was a victim of a burglary 10 plus years ago, and that kind of got me into more of securing my life and my family. And I had a close personal friend that went through an incident of ransomware earlier this year, and the impact that it had on his just the personal health, the impact that it has with your anxiety and the stress. And
right, absolutely.
He told me, he said, I feel like I would have been better off if the place would have just burned down, because I would have been through the stress in less time instead of having it drag out for 2 and 3 weeks. I mean,
absolutely.
It's brutal.
And especially when you're thinking about business, one, you get the personal aspect of it, but you also have the business. And when you're a business owner, you have both. And then you have everybody else, your employees' personal aspect of it, like you were mentioning before, your employees, your vendors, and I agree that list just keeps going on and on and on. And it's like a domino effect almost.
It really is. And it's possible that a hacker, there's been reports of hackers that have taken all the payroll information and then they turn around and try to extort money from all of your employees. Now, granted,
Absolutely.
it might be a couple $1,000s, or we're going to release all your information. So they just try to extort money from whoever and wherever they can.
Right. And well, I mean, we just want to stop that altogether. So, it's very important that people take this because it's getting larger, it's getting more common. And, I really appreciate you being here today to give this information to all of our members because it is extremely important. This is recorded. It will be put on to the Lima Chamber's webpage. And Dave, thank you so much for being here with your wealth of information and expertise. It's greatly appreciated. And we also
Absolutely.
like to say thanks to Perry Protect for sponsoring this program, as well as Shakely, which is our workers' comp provider. So thank you. Everybody stay safe. If they have any questions, they can contact you at 419-228-1360. Or
Yep, and I
at,
have my email as well.
okay, wonderful, at dreese@perryprotect.com. Thank you very much, David. Have a wonderful week. I know that you're dealing with your own crypto crisis in-house for another company of yours, and I wish you luck on that, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.